So when I started, I was really young. I was a baby. Started out as a baby, like
Man,
many
you're
people
lucky.
do.
You had access to it right away. Hi, everybody. This is Chel Hernandez, and welcome to Notes from my Improv Notebook. I just want to say thank you so much to all the listeners who are listening, and to everyone who's left a rate and review. I now have 13 ratings, so I really appreciate you. Thank you so much for taking the time. I promised that I would read some of the new ones, so I have 3 new ones, people who took the time to write, and I just want to say thank you so much. So this one says, Inside Look. This podcast is super cool. You're super cool. That was me. Then back to the review. It's great to get an inside look from a seasoned improviser. If you're thinking about starting improv, or even if you've been doing it a while, this provides some great intel to the improv world. Wow. Thank you so much, Grace P420. I like you. I like you a lot. So this next one is from Mr. T in AZ. Lots of good info and real ... I've only been improvising for about a year, and I'm always looking for new perspective and ways to get better. I love this podcast not only because Chel knows his stuff, but also because it's the perfect length. Lots of other improv podcasts cover so much per episode, it's hard for a newbie like me to process it all. This is a concise with great tips and clear explanation. Interviews have been good too. Aw, thanks, man. I appreciate that, Mr. T in the AZ. Finally, Tommy T-shirt canon. I dig it. Chel brought the idea of intentionality to the forefront of my improv mind, and I can see the benefit of this style of teaching right away. Chel is a gem, and I'm loving this podcast. Well, thank you so much to everyone who's rated and reviewed so far. Notes from my improv notebook, your internet's resource for free improv teaching. If you haven't already, please rate and review the podcast. Hit pause, and then put down 5 stars and write a little review. I'll read it. But honestly, all these rates and reviews actually help me get out to other improvisers just like you who just want to learn. For those of you, this is the first time tuning in, my name is Chel Hernandez. I'm an improviser here in Los Angeles, California. I love teaching. Send me an email about anything improv related at highsilentx@gmail.com or follow me on Instagram at highsilentx. I recently had the honor to interview Paul Vaillancourt about improv. Paul Vaillancourt is a veteran with over 30 years of experience who teaches across the nation. He is a member of the famous group Beer Shark Mice. He is a fountain of improv knowledge. He came in and wanted to talk about using the where to benefit your scene. But our conversation ended up being more fruitful than I could ever anticipate. So I'm going to go ahead and break up this interview into 2 interviews. This is one of 2. So if you like what you hear, tune in next week when I release the second part, because I love talking to Paul about improv. It was so enlightening. I got a case of the quiets, and I just sat there and I listened, and I was like, I am soaking up as much information as I can. I felt like I needed a notebook just to write down the things he was saying. So without further ado, please enjoy Paul Vaillancourt. Thank you so much. Paul Vaillancourt is here on the podcast today. I'm so excited to have you here on the podcast, I should say, because you are actually someone that I look up to.
Oh, that's very nice.
World.
Thank you so much.
No,
I'm a
not
big fan of your work.
Oh, thank you very much. We're just going to go back and forth for the next hour telling each other how
And I love your hair.
Oh, thank you. I love your hat.
Thanks.
Now, my first experience with you was actually in level 3 at iOS when the theater was open.
Sure.
And you actually opened my eyes to some cool ways to look at play.
Great.
And it really helped me kind of solidify how I teach and how I look at play now.
That's awesome.
You have a book out. It's called Triangle of the Scene.
It is?
It's very wonderful. That speaks about the type of play that speaks to you, I should say.
Yes.
Awesome. But I really wanted to bring you onto this podcast because I do think that you are like an encyclopedia of improv knowledge. And I think that students should know about you if they don't already. So welcome, Paul Vaillancourt. Yay.
Well, I think we've sort of just been around for a while. You sort of like pick up things here and there along the way. And I was lucky to be sort of involved in it early on when a lot of exciting stuff was happening. So I was either in it or nearby it. And it was really a really exciting time. So
The first time you performed, was it when someone brought you to a show, like a friend of a friend, or did
the first
you just?
time I performed improv.
I'm sorry, the first time you ever experienced improv.
The first time was when I was in college. I was a freshman in college at University of Maryland, College Park, and I had met a guy, Thomas, who ended up being a good friend of mine for a long time, and he was friends with some people who, he was a freshman as well, but he was friends with people who were already at the college in an improv group called Erasable Inc. INC Inc. He sort of got drafted into this thing early on, and he's like, I'm doing this improv show. Do you want to come and check out? And I was like, sure, whatever. You know how you're in college, just whatever. And so I went and I saw it, and the first half was all short form, which was super fun. But the second half was a Herald. That was, I'll say, what I always tell the story is, this is like when I knew that I was going to do improv. Was part of the Herald was this guy trying to find out who made Muzak. And so the whole time he's like questioning, trying to find out who made Muzak. And then at the very end, he's like, I'm going in there. And these two guys came out as guards. They're like, no, you're not. He's like, yes, I am. And he pushes past these guys, and these other people came out, and they were like, and he's like, you make Muzak, Paul McCartney and Paul Simon and John Lennon. And the guy was Paul McCartney, spoke up. He's like, well, we usually make the Muzak first and jazz it up for everyone else. And I was like, like it totally blew my mind. And I was like, I literally said out loud to myself, that's what I'm going to do with the rest of my life. And pretty much it's been a straight line up to this point. In a weird way, it was the beginning of a circle, because that troupe, Erasable Inc., was trained by a troupe from Yale called Purple Crayon, which was trained by Sharna and Dell when they were doing this tour of the Southern Comfort like improv competition. It was the original Improv Olympic was a lot more like comedy sportsy sort of like competition. And so that they were trained by Sharna and Dell, and they trained the group at my college, and then I sort of did improv, and then ended up at IO in Chicago back with Sharna and Dell. And it was like a big circle, like a big Herald and scene. It was like really weird. When I sort of put all the pieces together, I was like, that's crazy.
Yeah, that's awesome. And how cool that it influenced you so much that you decided to, you know what, I'm going to make this a part of my life. I think,
the centerpiece of my life for a long time.
Yeah, that's what I really like about improv. It just speaks to certain people, and it kind of engulfs you into this kind of like, wow, I didn't know that there was a place where creativity, anything can happen and anything can go.
Yeah, for sure. I often say like sort of my introduction to improv was like being called to the priesthood. It's just like, it was just super like powerful in my life. And I was just like, oh, and it just totally made sense to me. And I was like, oh yeah, of course. That's exactly what I'm meant to do. It just, every piece of it made sense to me. And I was like, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
People are sometimes scared about this or nervous about being on stage or blah, 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 blah. I was like, nope. I was like all in from the first moment. I was like, this is it. Let's do it.
That's awesome. Now, your journey has been a long one. And I think what comes to me in terms of those journeys is, have you experienced those moments where you keep hitting your head against the wall until it finally just like, oh, that's how you do it kind of thing?
Yeah, tons. Especially when I was in Chicago at IO, because that was such an intense, as I said, a really heady, exciting, intense time. I was there when sort of the ruling team, first of all, Dell was young and pretty healthy and sort of at the beginning and really creating a lot and doing a lot. And he was like a real guy there. Like, my biggest regret was that I never took a picture with him, because I was like, oh, he was there. I just always kind of assumed like a pillar of the world that he would always be there. That sadly was not the case, but it was a super heady time. It was like really exciting, because it was like the first team I ever coached was like 6 guys who were great. And then Amy Poehler and Tina Fey were on that team. And then the ruling team was the family. And that was Miles Stroth, who went on to start the Pack Theater, Matt Besser and Ian Roberts, who ended up with Amy and Matt Walsh starting the UCB, Ali Faranakian, who started the Pit, Adam McKay, who won an Academy Award for directing The Big Short, Pete Holney, who's a great improviser, still performing here in LA, Neil Flynn, who was on Scrubs, and then The Middle. It was great, super exciting. And it was just like all these powerhouses and creating all the time. So being there and sort of seeing like everything was moving super fast. Like I feel like improv was like really sort of evolving super quickly, because I read a book about talent and genius and how things really get good. And one of the sort of qualities they said was was a hotbed. One of the things was a hotbed. And that was kind of what IO was that like it is, you get a few good people there and then that attracts more and more good people. And that keeps upping the ante and upping the average of the whole thing. And like up, 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 up. And that hotbed and that excitement and that sort of like, oh my gosh, was really thrilling. And so you kind of wanted to do more and more. And so I was doing shows. I was doing a ton of shows. I was at the IO like 6 or 7 nights a week, like all the time. But the thing is, you get in tons of reps. And so you sort of cycle through your arc, whatever that is, pretty quickly. And so there was definitely times where I would sort of like go and like bang, 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 just like sort of top out or sort of plateau on my work. And I just was like, oh man, I get so frustrated. Or I would make some of them same mistakes, or I felt like I wasn't really getting the game or, you know, whatever. And I would just like keep banging on it, keep banging on it, keep banging on it, because that's all I could do. I was in love with it. I wasn't going to give it up. And I was young, right? And so I would just keep banging on it and going to see shows and working on it. And I was in class and eventually teaching class. And you just, then you have a breakthrough.
Yeah.
You know, and then you sort of, oh gosh, and then you sort of evolve super, super quickly. And then you bang, then you hit another plateau. But I realized early on, in a weird way, I was slightly older than all my peers. Like I came to it a little bit later.
Yeah.
So I was slightly older than all my peers. So I think I just sort of realized early on to me that it was just going to be a process and I was going to sort of be evolving super quickly sometimes. And I was going to be totally stuck sometimes. And that the only way through that was through it and not to give up on it or whatever, but to really just keep working it and just keep doing your best and keep making mistakes or having successes or trying different things. And one thing I would do is I would sort of go to shows and look at different players and kind of really try to like, oh, I'm gonna sort of see what he does and try to emulate his style, or I'm gonna see what her moves are and try to emulate that, or just trying to pull tools out of watching what other people were doing.
You bring up a great point, and that's being aware of the tools that people are using.
Oh yeah.
I think that's a great thing to do. Like when you go to shows, if you're specific about what someone does and you can call it out, like you can describe it, then you're aware of it.
Yeah.
And that way you can try to then incorporate it into your play.
For sure.
That's a great point. What I wanted to ask though as well was when you found yourself going through those hurdles or those hitting your heads against the wall, would you concentrate on one thing or would you just play to play?
I would try to, I think I was, well, that's a great question. Let me think back. I think I would sort of concentrate on one thing, like in the broad spectrum, like, oh, I really want to get better at recognizing the game. I really want to get better at whatever. And then I would try, and then each show I would try to sort of make a goal. In this show, I'm going to try to do X. And then just really playing. I got to play. One of the great things was I got to play a ton.
Yeah.
Like I said, I was there all the time, and it was kind of that kind of time where if you even went to see a show, there was like a 40% chance you could be in the show.
Oh, cool.
Like you never know. They would just, we're short. You want to play? Yeah, sure. I'll play, whatever. And just hanging out at the bar or whatever. And, so that was really great. It was super exciting.
Yeah.
And also so great to see people sort of like at the height of their powers, like it's still learning and evolving, but really having a handle on it. You know?
Well, you said it. It was a hotbed. It was
totally.
like, it was inspiring because you saw people do things and that inspired other people to do things. So you were constantly inspired by what you saw and you were constantly engulfed by this, like, wow, it doesn't just end at where I am, it goes even further. Or it doesn't end where Dell is, it goes even further.
Right.
Like that is such a cool place to be. And I think that goes back to like finding your community, right?
Oh, yeah.
Because once you find that community, once you find those people that you really trust, then you're willing to make more moves. And it's all about the people that you play with. If you trust them a lot, you're willing to push yourself to like a new move rather than joining a new team and being like, I think this is the right thing to do. I don't want to
The idea of the quote unquote right thing to do is really hobbling. It really sort of like takes you out of it, because then already the right and wrong, you're judging it. That's it's the difference between good and evil versus right and wrong, master mentality and slave mentality. If you're trying to do the right thing, then you're in slave mentality. You're really judging. You're judging yourself. You know?
Okay, great point. Instead of judging like if this is the right thing to do, just do.
Yeah.
Therefore, you are outside of that mental blockage that you put yourself through.
Yeah. Miles has a great improv tip on my YouTube channel where he says, you just got to do it. Like in class is where you sort of not fret over it, but you sort of think more about it and you sort of like, you sort of are more conscious of what you're doing. But then when you get into a show or a scene, you just got to do. You just got to do it. And you just got to stop thinking and just do it. And I always say it's the difference between like when you're in class, you're like learning a kata and you're sort of really worried about the rules or thinking about the rules and sort of like really trying to get your form right. And like, okay, this is an outward block, or this is my feet should be here, or my weight should be here. And you're sort of worrying about all those details. But when you get into a show is like sparring. You just need to sort of react in the moment and trust the habits that you've built in class. Like that's what class is for. Class is for learning and building good habits so that when you get to a show, you automatically do the right thing or the appropriate thing or the best thing for the scene at that moment, ideally.
I love that because I think I really do lean on like with students, what's your instinct? What's your instinct? Follow that, do that. And that's all like training your habits during a show. Like you rely on those habits, those instincts to just make that move, whatever it may be.
Yeah. And in class, I try to sort of shape those instincts or try to shape those habits a little bit. But when we're doing exercises and stuff, the exercises are kind of pointed at shaping or forging new habits. But then we do sort of like reflection scenes or just like a montage or whatever. And then you see, okay, well, how much of it got through? Like, okay, we worked on this and this exercise. Remember that? And like, oh yeah, I kind of remember that. And so, they can sort of reference back to that exercise that worked on this particular skill or this particular habit.
Do you come up with your own exercises in order to attack certain aspects of people's play? Or do you kind of go back to your bank of like, I've been taught all these different things?
I definitely have the hits. The ones that I sort of really believe in, that I think that I use all the time, that if I end up sort of like coaching like a one-off team, like coaching a team one-off like one time, or if I'm sort of doing like a workshop at a festival or something and it's just like sort of the basics, which is what I really believe in, then I kind of have these certain ones that I know work. They were really clear. They really sort of show off kind of what it is that I want to show. So that's really good. But as you teach more, I think then you kind of then sort of start to come up with new ways of attacking really specific problems or new problems that students have. Like I've been doing this for a long time, and just a couple of months ago, I was teaching this movie class and I realized, they have this habit that I really want to address. So I had to kind of sort of come up with an exercise or a way to drill on that habit to deal with that. So, it's a combination. I definitely have exercise, tried and true exercises that I use over and over again. But I do sort of, hopefully I bring something new to them each time, because it's like the equation is like the tried and true exercise plus the new situation or new student equals the experience. So you kind of need to respond to, you can't just try to force the students into like a cookie cutter response. You need to say, well, here's what it does. And then you still need to be present and responsive to what actually happens, as opposed to what you think is going to happen or what you want to happen. You have to see what actually happens.
Yeah.
And sometimes students like break it in a totally new way. It's like really interesting. Like I love this exercise, secret wants, scenes with secret wants. And one that I always love to do is two people, and I'll give them each, like, you want to get the other person to say, I love you. That's their secret want. And I've been doing this almost 30 years. And it's always like sort of this dance, and no one wants to sort of say it first. And then a couple of years ago, I saw these two. They're like, I love you. I love you too. Like right out of the gate, like their first couple of lines. I was like, holy crap, I've never seen that before. And that was super interesting, and it keeps me excited. It keeps me interested of like, oh, wow, that's really, what does that mean about this exercise or about them or about whatever? And so you sort of try to keep it fresh and keep it new each time. So it's sort of a combination. I have ones that I really believe in, but then also you sometimes need to craft a little special puzzle piece to sort of make it work for this team or this person or this whatever.
That's what I do love about this art form, is that you're always learning. And I think that teaching a student an exercise that's tried and true, and especially in your playbook, and then finding how they solve it so quickly just brings it in a new perspective. And you're just like, whoa. And another thing you said that was really interesting is not only using these exercises as staples, but also evolving with those exercises as well. And that is so smart, because it is improv. Improv is just listening and reacting to the situation at hand. And not every workshop or class is going to be exactly the same. Different skills are going to be tested, and they're going to be presented to you in different ways. So that is very interesting. I really
For sure.
like that.
And I do feel like over the years, the exercises some have sort of dropped out of maximum rotation, and some have sort of like emerged as like, oh, this is going to take the place of that when it hits this idea more clearly. But also some of the exercises I feel like have evolved a little bit in the doing of them. Like I love this warm up called It's Tuesday and, where basically two players get on stage and one person says, it's Tuesday and then they say something, And then the other person will like, it's Tuesday and you're late. And the other person will say the last thing they said and then add to it. I am late and you love to bug me about it. I do love to bug you about it and whatever, right? And so the way that I've sort of fine-tuned the exercise is I've made the exercise from it's Tuesday and to it's Tuesday and you. So now, rather than sort of like groping around a little bit, the students really focus on their partner, which is what I really want them to do. It's Tuesday and you. It's Tuesday and you're late. It's not, it's Tuesday and it's sunny outside. It's Tuesday and there's a hurricane. It's Tuesday and the volcano just exploded. It's not about that. It's never going to be about that. It's always going to be about what's up between the two of us. So by tweaking that exercise a tiny bit and just adding you at the end, now that those two players automatically key into each other. It's Tuesday and you're late. I am late and you love to bug me about it. I do love to bug you about it and you need someone to take care of you. I do need, and now it's building the relationship more quickly and more strongly than sort of like, a little bit outside this way and that way and blah, 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 all this other place. I really want them to focus on that thing between the two of them. And that little tweak of the exercise seems to really make that difference.
Yeah. And that's something that I took out from your class when I took it back at iOS was those you statements are really just gifts towards each other. And making them concentrate on each other of like you statements really focus or really gets your partner to listen because they're like, oh, they're describing me rather than describing something random that I might not even care about as my character.
Right. And ultimately that other random stuff doesn't move the scene forward. The scene is, I mean, if you believe that the core of every scene is relationship, then it's about what's happening between those two people in the moment while we watch. And every line that's not about that in some way doesn't move the scene forward. Right. Sometimes you have a line that's like not apparently about that, but it does feed one of their gifts or feed something about their personality, or it's sort of like it amps them up somehow. Okay, then that's great. Then that is about the relationship. That does move it forward. But ultimately, generally, mostly, we want to be talking about the relationship. And that you idea helps people do that.
I agree with that. You know, there are different ways to look at this art form. And a lot of people do look at like, what's the game of the scene compared to some people who I just love relationship and that's all I want to do.
I think that the relationship attack is a little bit more of an actorly approach. And I think that when I think of the game of the scene, I think that each player has a game that they're playing that is their like defining characteristic, right? So like if you think, I always use the example as Friends, right? In Friends, everyone has a super, super clear game that they play all the time. Ross is the nerdy one. Joey's the dumb one, Chandler's the sarcastic one, Monica's a control freak, Rachel's the princess, and Phoebe is the ditzy one or the spacey one. And that's all they do. And so once you sort of get your games out, then you combine games. This is the triangle of the scene. It's like my game plus your game plus where we are or what we're doing. And that's a scene. Those three elements make that scene happen, you know?
Yeah.
And so when I think of the game of the scene, I think it's those two games sort of rubbing up against each other until they sort of catch fire, you know, like two sticks, as opposed to the game being sort of something outside of us, some other sort of mechanism that we are cogs in. You know, I feel like it should be, I think the game is really between us.
Yeah. Oh, how cool to look at it. I think a lot of, at least the way I've looked at it before, the game has been very, what's the word where it's just, it's not between relationship, but it's the situation. Situational.
Like situation or premise.
Yeah, premise. To me, it was like, oh, game means premise. What's the premise of this thing? But what you brought up that I really like is, no, what's the inner game? Like, what's your personal game? Like, what's your character in that scene? And how do they respond to that other person with using their own game? Quote unquote.
For sure. Exactly. It's like my game sort of feeding your game and your game feeding my game and my game feeding myself and stuff. But also if you're doing long form, let's say, I think that it has other sort of ancillary benefits in the sense that like when you move forward into the next round of scenes or deeper into a montage, you can call people back by their game, right? Or you can sort of tag out and feed that person's game more, right? Rather than just plot or rather than just premise, you sort of know what that person does. And so you can sort of feed them in a lot of different ways and sort of heighten their game or play their game, or, you know, it makes them more useful to the whole piece.
Yeah.
Because they have a clear handle that you can grab. You're like, oh, that's the greedy guy. Oh, great. I got him.
Yeah. And then you can feed them in any way.
Totally. And also that person if they know they're greedy, they sort of are looking at the whole piece as like greedy guy, greedy guy, greedy guy, greedy guy. And so if someone's like, hey, look, I brought a bunch of donuts. And then greedy guy sweeps in and grabs them all. And you're like, oh, shit, that's fucking great, right? Because he's like from 2 scenes else, you know?
And the audience goes crazy. And they're like, I love greedy guy.
Right. Totally. And then you start printing T-shirts. And it's like, greedy guy, greedy guy. Anybody got some donuts? Or, you know how it goes. You've seen.
I've seen. Holy moly, that interview was amazing. And it's only 50% of what you'll get. So please tune back next week when you get to hear the second part of Paul Vaillancourt talking about how to use the where in an improv scene. Again, if you're looking for him, please follow on his Instagram at instagram.com/whatsupwithpv. If you're interested in what you hear on this podcast, Paul Vaillancourt does his own things on YouTube, and these are amazing. He calls them improv tips. They're 3-minute videos talking about specific goals in improv. It's such a wonderful resource, and they're improv tips. You got to check it out, and you can find that at youtube.com/pvimprov. That's P as in Paul, V as in Vaillancourt, improv. If you're looking for the theater that he works with, it's www.therevolutiontheater.com, facebook.com/revolutiontheater, instagram.com/revolutiontheater. Now the theater is black for December. They'll be back soon, but if you're looking to take a class, it would behoove you to take a class with Mr. Paul Vaillancourt. If you cannot take a class and you're like, man, I wish that guy wrote a book. He did. He wrote a book called The Triangle of the Scene, and you can find that on the Revolution Theater's website or by searching on Amazon for a physical or digital copy. Again, my name is Chel Hernandez. If you haven't already, please rate and review the podcast. I am available for anything improv related. Please send me questions at highsilentx@gmail.com or reach out to me on Instagram at highsilentx. Other than that, I hope you have a great week. Woo! 50% woo. 100% coming soon.